Welcome to today's virtual roundtable, COVID-19 Lessons Learned. This is sponsored by ACUHO-I's Public Policy Advisory Committee. My name is Spencer Giese. I'm a research and education specialist at ACUHO-I. I'll be your technical host today. We have an outstanding panel for you all. I'll give you a brief preview here of your panel who'll be speaking to you momentarily. Before we get started, just a couple of updates. First of all, as always, please connect with our online resources provided by ACUHO-I, whether that be our online community, our YouTube channel, our COVID-19 resources. These are all provided through your membership dollars, so please take advantage of those as we continue to try to push the field forward through these times. Also, as you are looking at your Zoom menu, you've got Q&A and chat functions as abilities to connect with our panel. I see some of you already reaching out to our panel to connect with them. If you have questions through our session today, please use the Q&A function, submit those questions there, and we will get those answered in our Q&A time. Also, we have a few other virtual offerings coming up, so I'd put those on screen for you now the next couple of weeks. If these are of interest to you, please head over to ACUHO-I and register for these sessions. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to our panel. Take it away, James.
All right, thank you, Spencer. And thank you to all the attendees and panelists who are here for our time together. Very grateful to get to share some of the information today with you all. As Spencer mentioned, we have a great panel for everyone today on this Lessons Learned Roundtable. Let me just start by introducing myself. I'm James Slater-Wu. I use he, him, his pronouns. I serve as the Associate Director of Operations at Stanford University. I'm joined by three great panelists, and I'll just be moderating the conversation. I will go ahead and hand it off to them to introduce themselves. If our panelists could share their names, titles, and as well your current residential context of your institution. Are you, is your campus remote, hybrid, in person, all that good stuff. So we'll start with Jeff.
Thank you, James, and thank you to my fellow panelists and the opportunity to join them. And I'm here representing all those that I get to work with day in and day out here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Jeff Novak, Associate Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration, Director of Housing and Dining here on campus. Our institution, over 45,000 students. In a traditional year, approximately 8,000 undergraduate students living in our residence hall. There's an additional 2,500 residents living in our grad and family housing. This year, we're right around 65% occupancy in our undergraduate halls and 80% in our grad halls. Hybrid, or all those terms we're all learning, whether it's asynchronous, synchronous learning, hybrid. I'd say hybrid right now. We have, in the fall semester, we were about 30% of our classes were in person. The spring has dipped down to around 20% here on our campus. Just for some background, living on campus is not required for our students. We do capture usually 92% of the freshman class here at Madison. Therefore, we have seen some of that dip as people made choices in the beginning and throughout the pandemic, as we've been flexible, allowing students to get out of their contract. We've dropped some as well, depending also on course offerings. So this spring, if their courses are online, we're not going to hold them to something that was different for their offerings in the fall. So good to be here and glad to join my fellow colleagues and look forward to questions that we get later. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Valerie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Valerie Simmons Walston, Associate Vice President for Student Services here at the University of Toledo. In a traditional year, we're slightly over 20,000, and we are situated in an urban setting in Toledo, Ohio. As far as our structure this year, we do have some in-person classes. Lots of students are remote, so I'm going to say we're in the hybrid model. As far as responsibilities on campus, of course, residence life and housing is one of the responsibilities. Also, I have oversight of the rec center and student union. One of my roles just this year has been main campus operations chief for COVID-19, and I'm a part of the incident command structure. So I've been a part of really some robust conversations as we have talked about this pandemic, planned for it, responded to crisis as we still continue to, and problem solve. So looking forward to engaging with our participants and engaging with our panel members today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Valerie. And Valerie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Arielle Tersch. I work at Pace University on the Westchester campus in Pleasantville, New York. We are a university that has 3 campuses. We have a campus in Lower Manhattan. We have a campus that is our law school campus in White Plains, and the campus that I am typically on, which is our Westchester campus in Pleasantville. We have about 2,500 students that live in a typical year on our New York City campus. And we have about 1,500 students that typically live in our Westchester campus. I'm not sure if I said my title in the beginning, so I am the interim associate dean for students. And the areas that fall under me are residence life, student activities and campus development, and community standards. In terms of where we were this past semester and where we're going to be, we're 100% hybrid. So we are, as Jeff said, everything. We're asynchronous, synchronous, people living on campus, people commuting. Our on-campus population is about 50% right now than what it typically is in a normal year. We do not have any residency requirements. There are not a lot of places for students in the Pleasantville area to commute from. So most of our students in Pleasantville live on campus. And I've been an integral role, from the beginning. They have gotten residence life and housing involved in all the planning for everything we've done for COVID this year. So I'm a definitely boots on the ground kind of person at this point. As a matter of fact, today I'm staffing our rapid testing center. I've been doing that all week, every day, 8 to 8. And so I took a break from that to be here with you all. So thanks so much for inviting me.
All right, so thank you to our panelists for your introductions. As you see, a wealth of experiences and institution types that are represented here today. So I want to give our attendees a little overview of how we'll spend our time today. We'll start with a couple minutes of moderator questions. And so I have a set of prepared questions that we'll pose to our panelists and get their thoughts on. We do want to save some time, obviously, for participant questions, though. So as Spencer mentioned, if any attendees have questions, please use the Q&A function to go ahead and submit those, and we will get to those about midway through our time today. And then we'll wrap up with final thoughts before closing out and sending everyone on their way. So to start us off, I have a question for all of our panelists, which is, how has COVID-19 changed your leadership style and philosophy of campus housing over the last 10 months?
I can answer that. I'll start. In residence life and housing, as all residential life professionals know, we always have to be ready, right? We're always on call. If there's an emergency, we have to be ready to respond. And so as a leader, I issue normally a lot of tough love. Hey, let's just get it done. We have a deadline. Let's just work together as a team. So, kind of suck it up, buttercup. Let's get this work done. Working in a pandemic, I've had to tap into my counselor side and be a little more attentive and compassionate, especially to our staff who has worked tirelessly. So I find myself saying, I need you to work at your comfort level, not let's get the deadline done. So I think it has softened my leadership style a bit because we want to make sure that we are being attentive to our staff and our students.
So I can follow up with that, Valerie, because I too have a suck it up buttercup kind of mentality. As a matter of fact, when I was going through the questions, that was one of the answers that I wrote, and my staff told me I couldn't say that. So I'm so happy that you did. But my leadership style, while it is sort of a tough love as well, I'm also the type of leader who is not afraid to do whatever they're asking their staff to do. So if I'm asking my staff to count keys, I'm going to go ahead and count keys with them if that's what needs to be done. And I think COVID has really just highlighted that even more. And I had to often, as Valerie said, have a softer touch with them because they were exhausted. So I had to sort of keep a keener eye on what they were doing and what the university was asking them to do. And then sometimes I had to jump in and say, no, I'm sorry, my staff's not going to do that. And anyone that's ever worked with me knows that I'm we can do anything you ask us to do and we'll make it happen. And my staff and will just do it. And we had to pull back a little from that in order to make sure that we were meeting the needs of our students. And so I think that has changed a little bit for me in this past 10 months or so.
I wish I could just say ditto. I think also, I don't know how it hasn't changed everybody's leadership style throughout, and if you haven't changed, then probably there hasn't been some adaptation needed. And I probably got to make sure I get this answer well, because I know one of the participants I work with here on our campus, and she'll certainly let me know if I'm not giving the right answer here, but I think certainly important to remember, that again, all of our staff are coming from so many different places out there that it's not just a student issue as well, that our staff and this pandemic has impacted their personal lives and how they then are expected still to come to campus, do their roles, being mindful of those that can do their jobs from home and who can't, our frontline staff in dining and custodial that must be here on campus while others still can telecommute, and balancing fairness and equity and which roles can do that and which can't, and the importance of all of that. I think the philosophy of housing, certainly, I don't think any of us have ever been challenged this much of the budgetary losses that we're seeing, and how are we then having to make decisions on the services and what's best for our students and our staff. At the same time, we have huge losses that need to be accounted for, and unfortunately difficult decisions we hoped we'd never have had to make before that aren't always going with our developmental side as we come up with in this field and shift more to the business side of these operations. And then lastly, I think my approach usually is very democratic. Let's talk things through, but in this, the directive nature needs to be there a little bit more, obviously, which is tough because certainly I don't have any more answers than anyone else as a director on how to handle this pandemic, but you're looked at as the one sometimes who needs to get the group going.
So. Great points from all of our panelists. You talked a little bit about basically kind of being in survival mode for the better part of the last year. And so I'm curious then, as we are preparing for a new year, a new semester or quarter academic term ahead of us, have you implemented any new policies or practices based on experiences from the previous term, whether that was a semester or quarter? I believe you're all on semesters. But yeah, have you implemented any new policies, practices based on experiences from the previous semester?
So we started doing something different with our testing. During the fall semester, we, as I'm sure everyone else on this call, engaged in surveillance testing, and we highly encouraged students to engage in our testing protocol. For spring semester, we're still doing surveillance testing, but when that student is randomly selected, they are required to test. And so that's one of the changes that we implemented as a university.
So we had last semester, we did a percentage of our residential population. We tested weekly at 25%, and it was a random 25% of the students. And so some students got tested once, some students got tested 5 times. It was very random. And We also tested our commuter students at a percentage and our faculty and staff. And what we learned by looking at all the data that we had is that our residential students were the ones who were testing positive, not the commuters, not the faculty, not the staff. So we're moving this semester, starting on Monday, to 100% of our residential students will be tested every single week. And the other thing that we learned is we're going to start holding them accountable if they do not show up for testing. We told them we were going to hold them accountable last semester, but we really had no mechanism in place to do that. And so we worked really hard. We have something that we've rolled out this semester, and it's the COVID accountability grid. And it lists sort of what the requirements are for students, and then first time violation, what would happen, second time violation, third time violation. And some of them first time violations are you lose your right to live on housing and you don't get a refund of your fees. And it doesn't matter if it's the first week or the second week. And I'd be happy to share that grid in the chat. I'll find it on our website and share it. But that is definitely something new. And part of the reason we did that was that we were holding students accountable for things that we had told them we would hold them accountable for, but they were saying that it was not clear. And so we wanted to be as transparent as possible that we are not playing anymore, and that you cannot violate some of these very, very serious things like a guest policy. Students don't think that it's a big deal to violate guest policy, but we have a no guest policy. No guest policy means no guests. And so I think now we're just trying to be more transparent so we have less violations this coming semester of COVID-related items.
Yeah, I think for us, it's been a continual adaptation all along. You know, we started off the year requiring once every other week testing. And then as we saw cases spike, we moved to once a week testing. That's for residential students. The rest of the campus was really, there were some surveillance studies being done, and then others who wanted a test could just get a test whenever they needed at locations on campus. But our residence hall students, as we ended the semester, were required once a week. The change for us now, not only for residential students, but the whole campus, is twice a week required testing as we go here. Starting in the spring, we're actually underway with that right now. As Valerie said, the compliance and accountability piece has been the challenge all along, getting good data, working with your health services staff who have access to that data, working then with your students who say, I was away, I really didn't miss my test. Well, you used your ID yesterday, you know, how were you away? So all of those have been kind of lessons learned, building these systems as well throughout the fall semester. And now to help us, the more that we can automate it, the more that it makes it easier on our staff, because it's been such a very labor-intensive process, administratively labor-intensive process of keeping account of the testing. And if you don't, yes, as Valerie said, hold them accountable, then there's no incentive to test, right? And so, yeah, for us, twice a week testing here is a biggie. Lessons learned of starting the semester off, or for the first week, no in-person seating in our dining halls, and then hopefully, as we see, we started moving yesterday, over 5 days here now as we start the semester on Monday. That after the move-in positivity rates that we see, hopefully we can open up the dining halls, which we did predominantly all fall semester, to seating right now, and then guest policy, open that up to be less restrictive as we go here as well. But I think we're starting off a little more restrictive here in the spring, and then letting up, knowing that we might have some, you know, high rates coming in from the break.
So it sounds like one of the big areas that some learning has happened is certainly in the realm of testing. We have some questions coming in from attendees, which I just want to point out that we will certainly circle back to those when we get to attendee questions. Most of those are around testing. Valerie, you did bring up a interesting point that I'm sure many residence life and on-campus housing programs are trying to figure out or dealing with, about guests and gatherings and policy violations, et cetera. So guest gatherings, you know, non-household interactions, in campus residences are obviously a point of concern with the pandemic that is, making its rounds, and certainly a challenge for residence life staff to try and manage, and other campus staff. So, and also for residents, who are experiencing the isolation of being on campus and not being able to be around friends, not having that usual support network that they might call on. So in line with public health guidelines, have you developed a guiding philosophy or policies for guests on campus? Have you all talked about student households, how those might be developed, how resident interactions might look like? Could you comment a little bit about that?
Sure, I can start this one off. So we have a strict no guest policy, period. And I will tell you that at the beginning, we sent out a lot of information to our residential students, letting them know that it was a no guest policy, and we would look to review that in the coming months to see if we could lessen that restriction. Well, I'll tell you that that was a mistake, and I wouldn't say that in the future, because they take that as you're going to change that policy at some point this semester and make it less restrictive. And when we didn't do that, they got very angry. Students got very mad that we didn't change the guest policy throughout the semester. And the reason we didn't is because our numbers on campus, at least on my campus, on the Pleasantville campus, were steadily increasing. And so we didn't feel comfortable allowing students to have guests in their rooms when we couldn't contain what we had in the rooms already. Some of our buildings on our campus are standalone townhouses, and that's a very difficult community to have a no guest policy. They have their own entrances to each house. And so that we had to figure out and work with our RAs on how to know who was in those houses. They're 3-story houses. And so that was a little bit tricky. And the other thing that really we didn't anticipate would happen is that the RAs about halfway through the semester said, okay, we understand residents can't have guests because they're not responsible, but we're the responsible ones, so we should be allowed to have guests. And we have a great relationship with our RA staff. Literally, if we ask them to go lick doorknobs today, every doorknob in the building, they would say, no problem, what time do you need that done by? And for them to sort of come back to us and say, this isn't fair, we want to have guests. And we contemplated it. And in the end, we decided that it would have not been basically a good look for us to have the RAs having guests and no other student able to have a guest. So what we did tell them was if they want to socialize with each other, they could go into the RA office, close the door, and socialize, but no more than 2 people in an office at a time. That way they could still interact with each other. I think they were really missing that bonding that everybody knows RAs bond so much in the beginning of the semester, team builders and, trust falls and things like that. And we weren't able to do any of those things. And so I think they were really missing that. And so we've done everything we could. We also built in some online chats for them and online forums where we could do some of those more fun things that they were looking forward to that would help build that community.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit. I mean, I think first also, and maybe going back, this just recognition, this stinks for students this year. It really does, and staff and our RA staff. And what can we do grounded in good science and I think in leadership style too? I think one thing too of remembering this year is that, I like to say housing not the expert in everything. So guest policies shouldn't be just limited to us in housing deciding on what the guest policy should be. It really should be working with our health services professionals on our campus and just health professionals in general to help guide us in what's best, based on what will help through this. So for us, guests, we started off the year certainly allowing guests from other residence halls, especially because we knew we were having our own testing program, and therefore we felt comfortable if we're testing, that would limit the risk in our other halls. And then as we saw spikes, we stopped the guests, and then did say up front, if we see changes in the test results and lower positivity rate, we will open it back up, and we did, and we saw lower rates and opened it back up. And that was helpful. So I think for us trying to just maintain constant communication, we got feedback from residents about allowing guests, not allowing guests. we wouldn't allow a guest, but they could go meet their friend in the dining hall. So how is that different anyway? At a two-person table, they're doing it outside the hall anyways. So balancing, again, the overarching goal of minimizing the risk. And does that make a big difference with just the guest behavior alone, or is it the other behaviors outside of the hall that are bringing the risk in too? So just constantly adapting.
So during move-in, when families, were checking their students in, especially for fall semester, and of course now, we only allow one person to help students move in. And we've carried that one person guest policy throughout the semester. If that policy is violated, then of course, revocation of visitation is taken pretty quickly, and we'll work in conjunction with the conduct office to impose any additional needed sanctions if we found that there were congregates of people together in one space.
Thank you all for sharing a little bit about that, and obviously the enforcement of such guest policies and public health, guidance and restrictions is so difficult and can be so taxing. Valerie, you just mentioned a little bit about that, revocation of things, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about who is enforcing that? So it sounds like predominantly these would be staff on the ground. So are these student staff members, resident assistants?
Thank you, James. We also have the best RA team, Valerie, so just so you know. So our resident assistants, of course, they're enforcing policy. We have front desk staff, clerical specialists, hall director. I live on campus, so if I see something suspicious or too much noise coming from a particular location, so it's kind of a group effort to reinforce. But as Valerie said earlier, our resident assistants, graduate assistants, and hall directors, those are the team members that are on the ground enforcing.
Can I just add to that, James, real quick? That those the same staff, RAs, RDs, assistant directors, associate directors, who are all doing those things. And what I will say about the guest policy is that our students didn't think we were serious about it. And it was a 3-strike and you're out rule. So if you get caught 3 times having guests or being a guest in someone's room, you lose your housing. So the first time that we revoked someone's ability to live on campus on the 7th day of the semester, students found out pretty quick that we were not joking when we said we would revoke your ability to live here. And that word spread pretty fast, and we didn't have to revoke anyone else's privilege until the very end of the semester, and it was only 2 other students. So I think they figured it out pretty quick that we were not kidding. And we use things, the RAs would tell us, well, we saw so-and-so go into the room. We have cameras in every single residence hall and in front of every single townhouse. And we would, my conduct office would sit and view camera footage and figure out, okay, that person doesn't live here, so now we're going to talk to them. It's not that we were sitting on cameras 24/7, but if an RA wrote a report and we wanted to be able to back it up, because the student would say, oh, I didn't have anybody in my room, we could easily back it up with the camera footage. So that did help greatly for us.
Great, thank you, Arielle and Valerie. Jeff, you shared a little bit about, I think in your introduction and also in our conversation leading into our panel, a little bit about the budgetary implications of all that's happened in the last, almost year. And so as we talk about the RA position, can you share a little bit about how has that position evolved in terms of what the compensation has looked like, for the role and for the work involved? And then also with, potentially other staff roles as well, what that's looked like.
It's actually a hot topic right now for us.
So, what you can share.
Yeah, yeah, it's public record, right? At an institution like ours. I think that the role has vastly changed across all of our institutions in balancing what position we want to put our RAs in. And here, first going to the role and then maybe the corresponding compensation. We tried as much and still are how to limit the interactions and reduce the risk in terms of face-to-face nature of those, and really encouraging as much virtual as we can, programming and one-on-one connecting with residents. Certainly they're still doing the crisis response and duty, and right from the beginning, making sure they had all of the PPE that they needed. And even then, as they requested face shields, getting them face shields that really, if that was what made them comfortable and were able to get it, why not? I do think too, there's a recognition that this might not be the job for some this year, unfortunately, and how to have those conversations. I think when we had that initial question of how has housing changed, I used to say, like, if you're someone who likes to be loud, the residence halls aren't for you. And if you're someone who likes, just knockdown quiet or not, just ultimate quiet, the residence halls aren't for you. But now it's hard, if you're a shy person, and we used to try to draw you out for our programming, how are we reaching those people? And that's a whole separate, round table that we could have another day. But how are we trying at least to have the house fellows that's what we call them here, but RAs reach those students? The compensation piece, trying to balance at least here. Is any one role different than another within our housing organization? Surely our RA staff are very important, but so are the custodians who work on that floor and interact with all of those students the same way. So as we made a policy here in the beginning, even of having to wear masks while your room door is open, and some saying, well, hey, they're in their room. Well, some of that's just about people starting out, coming out of their room a little bit, standing in the doorway. We have custodial staff going by, their comfort levels as well. So yeah, pay, we've talked about it a great deal. In the fall, we did recognize that we were facing some challenging times, and we put some compensation measures in there. Clear to say it wasn't hazard pay, because I think people need to understand, does hazard pay make it any less dangerous for you? And that's where, no. So then having those conversations again, maybe this isn't the job. And we did put some initiatives in place, and as we were sharing, pre-getting together, as we evaluate what that wound up costing us in the fall, and looking forward here to the spring and continued losses, balancing, continuing those initiatives with the overarching goal of balancing, or not balancing, but reducing, our losses here, and decided to not continue that, and having those conversations of it's not devaluing you or those, it's balancing this all. So yeah, I think that's the challenge. RAs, it's our frontline staff in the dining halls that are interacting with students as well, that everyone is a part of this pandemic, and trying to get everybody to see not just through their own lens, but everybody's lens, and that there is no special group. We're all dealing with it. Yeah.
And Jeff, I think it's more of a liability, like the RAs and their role, when done properly, and we know that they work very hard, they help to reduce our risk. But I think one major change is the in-person programs. We've moved to so many virtual programs, so that was less of a responsibility for the RAs. I did create a matrix to request stipends for my central staff, who were going above and beyond and just doing so much outside of their job description, but it had to be documented. Low risk activities, high risk, high support, low support. So I need to be able to share that matrix. So I want to do that because I was able to get some stipends using some of the government CARES Act money for our team members who consistently did things outside of their role.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you have any resources you'd love to share with the attendees, feel free to drop those into the chat area so that folks can see. Thank you all. I'd like to go ahead and circle back to some of these questions that are coming up. And the first kind of thematic area that was coming up was around testing. So we'll talk about an area that we all seem to love there. While I'm doing that, I believe Spencer's going to go ahead and launch some polls for the audience to engage in. I'm not sure if those are going to run in the background or, oh, okay. You should see a poll that has just popped up for our attendees. So if you want to go ahead and if the audience would like to go ahead and engage with those questions, that's just to get some audience engagement, and we'll perhaps have our panelists comment on those as well. The first question on the poll was, how has your team been approached for distribution numbers for the COVID-19 vaccine? And then the second question is, do you know where your staff members fall in terms of the COVID-19 vaccine? Again, that's just to get some audience engagement. We'll have our panelists potentially comment on some of those. But I'd like to get our panelists' thoughts about testing. So who is coordinating and paying for your testing?
So at PACE, we have a director of emergency management, and he is coordinating all of our testing. We also have a COVID coordinator position. We had one COVID coordinator position last semester. It was a faculty member who decided she would step up into this role. And she, unfortunately, by the end of the semester, stepped out of the role. And so we had to look for a new COVID coordinator that helps our director of emergency management. So they're the two that are the ones that are in charge of making sure we have all the tests, making sure we have all the labels and everything that we need for testing, making sure that the communications are going out, making sure that the tests are getting to where they need to get, and that we're getting all of the responses into our university healthcare, so we can figure out who is positive and who is not on campus, and then move from there. And who is paying for that? The university as a whole right now. I don't know that it comes out of any one specific budget. It just comes off the university's operating budget, which is why at the beginning of the year, all of our operating budgets were cut significantly across the board on campus. And I just have to assume that those additional funds were taken so that we could do things like test every residential student if that's what we need to do. And then the folks that are helping with some of the testing in the fall semester, we had no athletic programs running on campus, and we have several athletic programs that normally run on campus. And so we tapped into our athletic staff to help us. They were trained on how to do the testing and register folks for testing and all of that. So we've had a great support from our athletics department, and they continue to help us now. Come the spring semester, we do plan on having some sport activity. And so we'll have to look to some additional resources on campus, as well as we've had to hire some temps to help us with the testing in the spring semester.
So I'm not sure about the rest of the participants or maybe our panel members, but I know our budget was hit pretty hard. Jeff, I think you may have touched on that earlier. And so we have been cautioned to be frugal in our spending and wise in our budget management. So regarding paying for testing, we were able to utilize some of the COVID money that was provided to the university because, of course, the testing was for the most part for the students. So we are definitely in conversations now about funding those tests, for the remainder of spring and for fall. So most likely it's going to come from the outside source and maybe a portion from the university budget. But again, we've been told, to be very cautious with our spending.
Yeah, for us, coordinated through our university health services, certainly partnerships, our EOC has been operating through our emergency operations center in various aspects of it, and so many different collaborative groups. I have not seen a bill yet. I don't think there will be a bill directly for housing. The required testing weekly and now twice a week is our executive leadership initiative, and out of great care and concern for our students and our community as well, that we're very much a part of, and worrying about our own students spilling over into the community and transmission there. So we in housing are not responsible for the testing costs. We are covering the costs of our isolation and quarantine housing that we operate. So the staffing that we brought on extra to run our isolation housing, and then our partnership with local hotels to put students in quarantine as well as a cost that we're paying for here.
Thank you all. Valerie, you were mentioning that you were helping with your site testing center today. Can you comment on this question here? Do you require students on your campuses to get tested at a specific time or on a specific day? And there was also a question about how that affects students who may have outside commitments that might not be as flexible for that.
Sure. So the first part of that is every residential student was required to get a test within 7 days of coming to campus. They had to sign up for a move-in time. Everything was socially distanced. We decided after we were going to require them to do a 7-day test, we knew that not every student will have the ability to get a test, right? There's a lot of areas that just don't have high numbers of testing sites. And so we made a decision that we would also rapid test every single resident student as they came on campus. And so we're doing that this week and next week. And knock on wood, knock on my head for that, we have had no positives so far in our rapid testing. So that we're very happy about. James, I'm sorry, what was the second piece to that question?
How does that impact students who may have commitments that are not as flexible to accommodate the testing schedule?
Right. So the testing schedule for just coming on campus, everybody has to do that. There are no accommodations to that. But when we're doing our once a week testing for every residential student that they have to go and get one test done every week on campus, we learned very quickly last semester we were only doing it 1 day a week, and we got a lot of residential students who said, well, I can't, I'm student teaching, or I have my nurse practicum, or I have an internship somewhere and I'm not on campus that day. So this semester we've opened it up and we're doing testing every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So the students will go to one centralized location on any one of those days between 9 and 5, pick up their test. It's a self-administered test. They take it back to their room or to a bathroom if that's where they would like to do it. They administer it for themselves, put it in the little tube, and go back to the testing hub, we're calling it, and drop it. And so I do believe we will have some hours that run a little bit past 5, and some days we'll do before 9 in order to accommodate those students who are, like I said, student teaching. We have a very large nursing population, and so a lot of our nursing majors have practicums off campus and they're just not here to do it. If a student comes to us and says, I can't make any of those days, what am I supposed to do? We'll work with them. As long as they talk to us, we'll figure out how to make it work for them. If that's, we give them their test ahead of time and they drop it off, you know, to the RD potentially, and then the RD takes it over, or they give it to a friend to drop off and take it over. We're definitely going to work with them because we would like 100% compliance with our testing this semester.
Great. Thank you, Valerie. We have a question here, Jeff and Valerie. Wonder if you could comment on this. How are you handling cases amongst RAs and pro staff who who must react to calls or show up in person, but are isolating or quarantining so they can't show up? Who's helping to pick up that slack, and how has that plan been determined?
Thank you for that question. So I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Valerie said earlier. In the field of student affairs, particularly residence life, it is very difficult to ask your team members to do something that you as the leader or me as the associate vice president would not do. And so I have tasked my senior staff, who, of course, working at their comfort level, to kind of pitch hit when we've had a team member, a professional staff member, and a resident assistant. I've asked them to kind of chip in when we've had individuals impacted by COVID-19. But again, it's all in your leadership and the behavior that you model as a leader. I think it's very difficult not to chip in when they see senior level leadership chipping in. My vice president, he's right on the ground doing things as well. So I think it's all in the behavior that you want to see, and supporting that team spirit when one of your team members are down.
Yeah, I think I understand. I mean, if we had RAs or others that were in isolation or quarantine, they wouldn't even be functioning in the role of their position. They'd be there in isolation or quarantine. Now we are asking RAs who are asymptomatic, if they can continue doing interactions with their residents from our isolation housing that way virtually, sure, please do that. But you know, we've built systems in place that have certainly, and we've had multiple RAs get COVID, and not to date yet a professional staff member on the residence life side. Actually, I should take that back. We did, but certainly we have the backups in place, and happy to talk with others offline if people want. I would hope that we're doing enough as our profession to not ask anybody who's supposed to be isolating or in quarantine to perform the functions of their role. They shouldn't be doing that at all. They should be isolating and quarantining. So we got to do better if we're asking them to do that. I'm sorry, you know.
Certainly. On that note, this kind of relates back to something we were talking about earlier about policies related to living on campus during this time. So there a question here that there are some institutions that are saying that they will not allow on-campus residents to leave campus due to the risk of off-campus transmission. Are your institutions implementing this type of policy? And if so, how are you enforcing this? I'll open this up to any of our panelists. I think it'd be interesting to hear how any of you are attempting to handle that.
So I can start just because I have it popped in my brain that something that happened this week. We're doing, you know, our testing, and we're wristbanding every student who comes through for rapid tests so that we know which students have done rapid testing and which ones haven't. So when they enter, our campus security can see if they have a wristband. If they don't, they send them to the test site. So I was putting a wristband on an athlete yesterday, and he said, "Now, ma'am, I have a question. I live in the townhouses and I have to go grocery shopping. I have no food. Am I allowed to go off campus?" I said, "Of course, we are not stopping our students from leaving campus. It would be, in my opinion, virtually impossible to do that. And I think our numbers would have plummeted beyond where they have already plummeted for on-campus housing. So we do allow them to go off campus. We are strongly encouraging them to limit their time off campus and to limit who they're going off campus with, and trying to remind them that if you go off campus with somebody in your car, you should still be wearing a mask, because we did have quite a few positive cases last semester where it was my friends and I all went to the mall together. There were 4 of us in the car and nobody had a mask on. One of them was positive, so they all wound up getting sick. So we're not restricting people from leaving campus. And I think it's interesting that our students in some ways think that we are. And I think that might help us at some point, that maybe they won't go off campus as much and just stay here in sort of their little safe pod.
I think it's important, especially in this climate, that we discuss and we market policies that we can realistically enforce. We can't be the FBI, you know, we can't, you know, send the police out to barricade our students in. So we also are not, you know, mandating that students have to stay on campus, but we are educating them and, you know, highly encouraging them to stay put, you know, stay in place. But as far as mandating, that is something that will be very difficult to enforce. Therefore, we are not marketing that type of policy.
Jeff, anything to add on that?
No, I mean, we did during the year when we saw some large spikes have our 2 largest residence halls. We put on a kind of a quarantine lockdown. You know, I think tremendous lessons learned of how to do that with 2,300 people at one time is a difficult challenge. But nothing particular to add. It'll be neat when we're all done with this, though. I think I joked around, if ACUHO has programmatic sessions related to COVID in the future, I'm not going to attend because I want to be done with COVID. I think we all do, and never want to speak COVID again, you know, whatever conference we attend. But it'll be neat to read all the case studies and just how we all handled this differently. Of campus that restricted, we're requiring twice a week testing and not restricting. And I've got Big Ten counterparts who are doing no testing, and parents who are saying, how come you're not like such and such, and you're being, you know, so you're asking so much more. And I gotta believe that at most colleges of similar size and student, that we have similar positivity rates. It's just one's choosing to test and is there a benefit to testing? There's no downside to it, obviously, in early identification, hopefully stopping spread. But yeah, no, we're not restricting, and it really is about just again educating, as Valerie said, of what people can do individually to truly make a difference here.
All right. So Spencer's going to go ahead and share the poll results as we enter the final 10 minutes or so of our time together from the poll that we ran for the attendees. First question was, has your team been approached for distribution numbers for the COVID-19 vaccine? And of the respondents here, we see 79% no, 21% yes. And then for our second question, do you know where your staff members fall in terms of the COVID-19 vaccine distribution timeline? And we have 60% at no and 40% at yes. So I would love to hear from our panelists your responses to these questions and any insights about the vaccine and distribution, as it relates to our work.
So we have begun discussion actually several months ago about the vaccine, just as a university. And I actually have that 4 o'clock meeting where we are having discussions about the vaccine. Do I know where my particular team stands about with the vaccine? Some people are very vocal, some are not. And I think we have to be very sensitive that there are some cultural, there could be some cultural hesitancy to receiving vaccine due to some things that happened in our past history. So I think we have to be sensitive to that, that certain populations might be a little bit hesitant. And I think the way to respond to that is to just have a robust education and marketing campaign. The issue is we don't know some of the side effects yet.
I can answer that. Yeah, we've been fortunate on our campus to already have vaccine distribution. In housing, we've had upwards of 20 people already receive the vaccine, identified as those who come in direct contact with COVID positive, students. That's our staff that's working in our isolation halls. They've been fit tested for respirators and been using those all along. But as a campus, we designated, at least for our staff, that go directly into those halls, eligible and have already received vaccine. It's not a requirement to get it, but most have taken advantage of that. And then we have already, shared our next list for getting the vaccine, our 1B list. But certainly states are formulating who are on 1B kind of lists, but our 1B does have most of our on-site staff, both full-time and student. So, we're hoping soon, within the coming weeks, that we'll start with that group.
And we, in New York, where we're located, I think our staff would be considered 1D, and we're currently on 1B, and we don't have enough vaccinations in New York for 1B. So I've had conversations with my staff about what that looks like for us. And some are hesitant about, just as Valerie said, I would 100% agree with everything she said. Some of my staff are hesitant about getting it, and some of them are, if I could get in line right now and get a vaccine, I would. So I think hopefully New York can get more vaccines and more frontline staff who are working directly with students who have COVID. For us, any student that was tested positive that didn't want to go home, we housed them here, and it was our responsibility to bring them 3 meals a day. At times, if they're quarantined for 14 days and they only brought 7 days worth of clothes with them, we're sometimes doing their laundry and things like that. And so I would definitely push for our staff to be able to get tested. We just don't have the tests available. To get vaccinated. We just don't have vaccines available in the state of New York right now for us. So.
All right. Thank you all. Certainly something for us to keep an eye on, and in some ways remain optimistic, hopefully, about for the year ahead. I think there are some things to look ahead to in this year as we look to get back to normal or something like it. We are in our final few minutes here, so I want to ask our panelists if you could share if you're okay with folks following up with you, kind of reaching out to connect, if you could go ahead and drop your preferred information in the chat, that would be great. And Valerie, I think there was some interest in that accountability grid or matrix that you mentioned.
It's already
earlier.
dropped in there. It was,
Oh, is it?
Vika dropped it in. It says sent on behalf of the University of Toledo.
Got it.
I did my homework, Jack.
I want to make sure you get to that 4 o'clock meeting. Okay, so I want to make sure that we are respectful of time, know that folks have things to get to. So I just want to thank, so as our panelists are dropping their contact information here, I want to thank all our panelists for spending time today to talk about some lessons learned from COVID-19 in this ACUHO-I roundtable. As Spencer mentioned at the beginning of this is a recorded session, so you certainly have this to reference back to. He also shared a number of upcoming sessions that ACUHO-I is hosting. So feel free to look into those on the ACUHO-I website and other channels if you're interested in further engaging. To Jeff's point, hopefully we won't have too many more topics related to COVID-19 on these, and we can start talking about some other topics as well. It looks like, Valerie's, not to belabor the point, it looks like the documents were about stipends that were shared.
Right, it's the matrix that I use to get the stipends. Only see 2 documents about stipends. Okay.
I think
Because
folks were
she
interested.
shared both.
Valerie, it might have been you mentioned an accountability matrix, I believe.
Oh, yes, I mentioned an accountability. Yes, I have that pulled up and I will, it's within our guide to residential living for our residential students, and it's page 10 of a document that I'm about to drop into the chat for you.
Got it.
So if you just click on this link, bam. Usually I ask somebody else to do things for me. I'm so impressed I was able to get that in there.
There we go. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and I know we're about to close and we all needs to go to, but when I was thinking about this today and I thought, oh, maybe we'll be asked to make closing remarks, and the only closing remark I would like to make is, a lot of us are perfectionists in this field. We care very deeply about our students, about our staff, about our families, everybody, but we need to remember to give ourselves a little grace in that perfection sort of attitude that we have, and that nobody's perfect, right? This is all new to everybody, and we're all doing the best we can, and we're all learning about different things every day. And so it's really important to give yourself some grace and give those around you some grace. And so I'm going to leave it with that.
Very well said. Thank you. And I would just like to thank again our panelists for joining us today, our attendees, and in following up from the historic day we as the United States celebrate yesterday, I just want to wish everyone a really happy and healthy new year ahead. We've got this. We will figure this out, and I look forward to seeing you all post-pandemic, hopefully soon. So wishing you all the best, and take care.